Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio. My name is Steve Roest, and each week we bring you the best news and interviews with the leaders, founders and clinicians who are shaping the healthcare landscape in the UK and beyond. I'm a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I'm passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. And today is no exception. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest, Daniel Rooke. So as a bit of a background, as well as being a very nice guy and a hotshot lawyer, Daniel is the co-founder of Start Codon, which is a next generation health tech accelerator coming out of Cambridge and is backed by some of the most prestigious names in life science and healthcare. Start Codon are literally creating the companies of the future. They're at the bleeding edge of healthcare and health tech. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Daniel. Daniel, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for such a lovely introduction. It's not often I get described as a lawyer and a nice guy in the same sentence, so it makes a distinct change from what I'm normally subject to.
Well, you know, we like to talk people up on this show. It's a good news show, right? And I think today, of all days, we could probably all do with a bit of sunshine, right?
It's absolutely 2021 could do with some sunshine generally, I think. But no, it's really nice to be invited and pleasure to be.
And how are all your companies at the moment in lockdown and things like that? Is that affecting them, or are they still okay? I know we're going to get into the details, but what's the kind of mood in the camp?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, mood in the camp is generally fine. So when it happened in March, we had some initial issues with getting access to labs and so on. As they initially closed due to the pandemic, lack of data being available, and so on and so forth. I think that the situation now versus what it was like back then has changed. Labs are still predominantly open, so companies that are doing development work can still do development work. There's process labs that weren't there before, and so because the companies that we invest in tend to be such an early stage and quite heavy in the development side and require a lot of time in the lab, actually not at the moment a huge amount of impact in that regard. Some supply issues, but generally speaking, the companies are doing well. They're cracking on with their plans, and we're pretty happy with the rate of development and
Great. Perfect. So generally the show has a rough format. So the first bit is the origins, how you came to be doing what you're doing. The second bit is really going to be digging into, I'm really interested. I love what you guys are doing at Start Codon. I know that at PocDoc, we've had some interaction with you guys. I've mentored some of your companies on the commercial side of things, and they are, apart from being a great group of individuals, doing some unbelievably exciting things. So we can get into that in the second bit. And then the final bit is what's in the future for you and for Start Codon. And then there's a few topics that I know you and I have already kind of picked out that we want to kind of highlight today and kick around. So just to start off with, so your background, you're a lawyer by trade, so to speak. So how did you kind of make that transition into health tech or healthcare, or, talk us through that, because that's not necessarily like a normal pathway for a lawyer to follow, really.
Yeah. So a bit of an odd one. So I ended up going into law, I think, originally for rather grandiose purposes of, wanting to do well and so on, and then realised that actually the industry operates slightly different in that. So corporate law by backgrounds, focused on kind of venture capital and with a specific focus on healthcare and tech, but more on the healthcare side. So spent several years in private practice as a senior lawyer, a large part of that in a large law firm called Taylor Wessing, which is probably the preeminent tech and one of the preeminent life sciences firms in the country and in Europe. So I essentially went into law, built a specialism in advising healthcare companies. And
so you kind of chose to kind of stream yourself onto healthcare and health tech at an early stage, or was that something that someone just suggested and you sort of ran with it? And like, did you have a background in it before, in science or anything like that?
No. So I think a combination of several things. So when you start as a junior lawyer, you do lots of different things around the edge, right? And you find what you like to do when you qualify. So you're going through your degree, you've done your postdoc, you're doing your training, you pick your area you want to be in. I picked corporate law, and then you do a multitude of different deals, transactions, and so on, and try and find what it is that you like. So it takes a few years to iron that out. When you get to the point of ironing that out, for me, it was in venture capital. Really like doing the fundraising stuff, like seeing the different techs, all the disruptive things that companies could do that you worked with and what they could solve. And that really got me interested in it. I got in healthcare for for reasons that I thought, well, initially for career progression, thought it was a good area to be in, but also just really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the industry. Really enjoyed getting to meet the amazing scientists, entrepreneurs that you meet who are developing kind of these, bleeding edge technologies basically to help patients. And so I got into it that way, and then just kept doing more and more of it. Actively sought them out. Ended up kind of co-leading the kind of healthcare corporate practice originally at Taylor Wessing when it was getting off the ground, informally, and then just basically doing that. So the bigger the round, you've got everything from hundreds of thousands up to hundreds of millions. And
Okay.
Just got into it that way. So no background. After leaving private practice, I went in-house. So I went to be a general counsel of pharma, of a biotech originally, and lived through the whole kind of commercialization journey. So from development biopharma company up to actually selling products to the market, having to live through that to help set up the US and European sides of the operation, and generally going to the kind of commercialization piece from that. And that experience, along with the private practice experience, got us to effectively, me and Jason, my co-founders, who effectively started Start Codon.
Yeah. So when did you meet Jason? Who I mean, I love Jason, and I actually think he might be one of the most stylishly dressed people I've ever met in my life. I mean, he's like, he just looks like he's walked out of a GQ magazine, I think.
Yeah, it's tremendously annoying, let me say. It takes him distinctly less time to look like that than it does me. But Jason's and annoyingly has also got a brain the size of a planet, which makes you generally feel inferior. But so how do we get to?
You're great too.
So how do we get in contact? Just through a meeting of minds, really. So when I was from connections built up when I was in private practice, and then connections that were kind of reinforced in industry, got talking to some of the local investors in the area, some of the local kind of thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of publication, or some publications from the government about there being a funding gap in kind of early stage tech, generally, not necessarily in healthcare. And so Jason and I got introduced through some mutual contacts. And I think from our point of view, we always felt, we clicked on the basis that we always felt that there was a bit of a lack of, particularly lack of funding in healthcare. So tech's easier to fund typically, tech is in the broad kind of sense of the word, because your overheads are lower, your kind of market access is very different, and your IP position.
By tech, just for everyone listening, you kind of mean more things like, taking some extreme examples like Uber or Deliveroo, or when they were smaller. That's the sort of tech you mean, the more consumer facing. I'm going to set up a marketplace to let people, I don't know, sell their apartments online.
So SaaS, some things in the fintech space, but kind of looking really at those. Those areas where digital solutions effectively, fundamentally. So it's a bit easier to get those companies funded, and for all the reasons I said, capex is lower, market access hurdles are typically lower, but not always.
Yeah, so we actually had a really interesting chat with a guy called Peter Cowley, who you might have come across through the Cambridge thing. So I want to get into why you guys are in Cambridge, because I know that Peter's obviously a big proponent of Cambridge, the Cambridge cluster. And, it's actually rivaling, if not exceeding, London at the moment in terms of its output for high-tech, life science, health tech companies. But one of the big things that he was talking about was that for health tech companies, there is this kind of valley of death between, when you come up with the idea and you prove feasibility, you think, okay, well, we've got something, but it's extremely difficult to fund the next stage because of the risks and timelines for health technology, because it takes so long to get to market, and I know that you guys do some stuff in drug discovery, and that could be, 7 to 10 years before something generates any revenue. So yeah, is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, it is. And so I think, with tech, you can sometimes fund just an idea. I think in healthcare, life sciences, you need that data. That data is often funded by universities, institutions, by the government through research grants and so on. And it has to get to a certain stage. And then the issue is, when it's at a stage where it might be capable of being spun out, who's there to fund it? Who's there to invest in it? And the population of funders in the kind of that area, the kind of healthcare side, is lower than it is on it's lower. There's less of them than there are on the tech side. And I think that's primarily because they need more cash. It's understandable. They need more cash early on. They burn through cash at a quicker rate. the exit profiles are longer. So for investors, I say angel investors like Peter, who I mean, Peter's a different level than some. He's a very well-known entrepreneur and investor, but a lot of investors want their exit, particularly angels, sometimes in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah,
and that's just sometimes not possible in healthcare.
Well, it's not with health tech. That's just not going to fly. You might get lucky, but it's more going to be likely to be light health tech, right?
Yeah.
More on the kind of thin app end of things, as opposed to anything that's going to be shaping the future of healthcare, I would argue.
I entirely agree, and I think that the issue there is that you're not going to get an exit in that timeline, so you have to find people who are willing to put in enough money at the outset, sometimes when there's a lack of data or there's only some data available, and someone is prepared to take the risk to fund that, and also because there's a lack of people funding. You've really got to, the point is, it's not the technologies, the really cool, great disruptive technologies sometimes don't get out of the lab. They don't get out of the lab at the right time. They're laying them out because there's just a lack of funds there. So Start Codon was started with a view of trying to really kickstart that by saying, look, we'll start writing checks at $250,000. We'll enable companies to be spun out at the right time, where people would otherwise take a punt based on the data, because it's either too long to exit, it's too risky for some more established players who have who are more kind of they put lots of money in, but in a small number of opportunities. And so to kind of get those companies as a launch pad, basically, to get those companies out of the lab, and to also find people with mutually aligned, who've got interests, who might want to also fund those companies at an early stage. And that pool of people is smaller. It's growing, and there are people that are moving into the space on the VC side, but it's small. And so we are really there to try and kickstart that, being a bit of a West Coast mentality to doing that with the accelerator program.
We'll get into that, don't worry, because there's a lot that I want to showcase of what you guys are doing, because I think it's absolutely phenomenal. But before you did this, before you went off on your own and you did Start Codon, like did you have any fear? Because I guess you'd already left the kind of traditional lawyer path of staying within a massive firm and kind of progressing. But like, what was your personal journey like from, very prescribed pathway in a very, very, very prestigious law firm to, ending up being a kind of a founder of a extremely disruptive accelerator that's doing things that no one else is doing?
Yeah, so for me, so back in 2015, my wife and I had a stillbirth, and one that could arguably have been prevented. And so, I use that also, comes into some of the stuff we'll talk about later about my desire and my interest in certain sectors of healthcare. But we had a stillbirth. It could arguably have been prevented without going into the details. There was a degree of negligence on a hospital's part, and it got me to reassess really what it is that I wanted to do. And I thought, well, being a private practice lawyer is great, but pays well, hours are very long, and actually, is it really where I wanted to be? Did it enable me to build up all the skill sets that I wanted? The answer to that after reflection was no. So I went in-house as a GC. That got me more experience on the ground, working for a pharma company that was focused on rare and orphan diseases, which is an area that is also close to my heart. And that then got me the kind of more rounded experience, along with everything else, to think about, actually, is there something that could be done to plug the gap? And that's when Jason and I had our meeting of minds and came together to start Codon, because there's a patient aspect, there's a personal aspect to it, and there's an interest generally in the sector, which kind of all came together for the both of us and made us click, and really a crazy step to go off and try and do something which we don't think at the time anyway anyone else had managed to do in Europe.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know who else is really trying to do it the way you guys are doing it. But it's funny that from speaking to a lot of people, and I know for me personally, that a lot of people in healthcare or health tech are in it because they have a personal motivation for some reason, some history, some story, some connection that's kind of motivated them to do it. And it's more than a job, and it's more than a salary. It's a kind of a calling in a way. So yeah, I can sort of relate to that aspect of it. So to go back to the bit around, are there particular areas where you have a personal interest, even if they don't align with Start Codon? Are there some areas where you or had a personal interest, or very are kind of you keep an eye on in terms of areas?
Yeah, so I think kind of preventative medicine in the sense of looking at ways that you can treat diseases at a really early stage, looking at technologies that can help to inform lifestyle, drug or other choices, gene therapies, to basically prevent people developing diseases at the outset, even if they're genetically prone to diseases, or they're at a higher risk because of their genetic profile to develop certain diseases. Things like that really interest me. I'm also very interested in general health. I mean, Start Codon's more on kind of the healthcare, life sciences, quite deep tech side, but I have a general interest in health and wellness, which I think is particularly relevant actually because of COVID and the impact that that's had on people's lives and the pandemic. And early detection. So again, in the realms of detecting diseases earlier, looking at ways that we can address that. I think there's a market. There's a personal need for that, because the issues that we went through could have been dealt with, I think, and detected earlier. But there's also a wider societal kind of cost benefit from that.
Particularly in the UK, with the health system that we have. I mean, there's benefit in any healthcare system to prevention, and I think that this is something that we struggle with at Vital Sign Solutions, where all of our products and services are around inspiring people to take more control of their health, test themselves for their lipid levels, test themselves for their HbA1c, diabetes risk levels, get a health assessment, connect onto follow-on care. A lot of that, or all of that, is geared around reducing risk, right? But it's harder to convince, I would say, systems and organizations, although the NHS has gotten a lot better at this. And that's one of the things that we're working with them on the NHS accelerator, is around how do you prioritize prevention when prevention might not pay off for 5, 10, 15 years, where, you've got wards overflowing right now, that type of thing. So it's quite hard. Is that something that you've sort of come across or noticed?
Oh, absolutely. And I think actually, you've hit the nail on the head in the sense of, I think we're very, there's definitely a focus on kind of reactive care than there is on proactive care. So kind of, and I've noticed that across the board. And I think, and I actually think that the recent pandemic, and we can talk about this a bit more later as we discuss beforehand, but I think there's going to be a change in focus of how healthcare providers provide the care. There has to be, and actually maybe that's the trigger point for the things that you're doing at Vital Signs, and to really get people to adopt new technologies, because in many ways the NHS, and can definitely think of some examples, but it's been forced to adapt new technologies because of the pandemic. And
well, so one of our advisors is he's a very experienced GP. He runs a big GP network, a primary care network up in Sandbach, and he said that the scale of change within primary care in the last 12 months has been greater than 20 years. In the space of 12 months.
You've seen some amazing, some fantastic technologies come out from things like video translation services, where people can translate. Patients can talk to doctors where they wouldn't be able to do that face to face, because it translates their care. You've seen different things like imaging, things like you're doing, vital signs, blood, testing, everything like that has all changed. You've seen huge strides in things that wouldn't otherwise have been considered. You've seen changes in points of care testing, which has always been an area where people have said effectively, it's got too many issues with it. You suffer from accuracy if it's not done by a professional, and you do. I mean, you do. If you look at the new COVID test, for example, the accuracy there, you do suffer from it. But there's been a willingness and a forced willingness sometimes, but
exactly,
different solutions. How have you found it different in the UK versus, say, other territories where you guys are working at Vital Signs? Have you found that there's more of a have you found them more accepting of earlier technologies that help to diagnose issues earlier?
I mean, I think in the UK within healthcare, it's quite hard to avoid the NHS. It's sort of almost like it's like the lodestar in a sense. And I remember when we first started and we were raising the first couple of rounds of capital, half the time people would criticize us because we had a strategy for the NHS, and half the time people would criticize us if we said that we didn't, and that we'd focus on consumers. So you sort of can't really win a bit. I think that our view was that we always wanted to, we feel our technology can apply in lots of different ways. Consumers can adopt it directly, or we can work directly with healthcare organizations. I think the area of real interest for us is the US. I think the propensity to take more control over your health there is certainly greater. And the ability to reach consumers directly with healthcare solutions is greater. There's a complexity around the reimbursement model, obviously, which you have to crack if you want to become, if you want to get reimbursed and things like that. But the sort of the baseline view of investing in your health, I would argue, is higher in the US than it is in the UK. I think across Europe things differ. France has a very similar system to the UK. There's a huge publicly funded healthcare system. Germany's insurance-based, Switzerland's insurance-based. So those are a lot more. Germany's actually a really attractive market in general, because obviously it has an extremely high sort of, what would I say, sort of digital literacy, extremely high sort of awareness of healthcare issues. They have, they've always had, I used to live there for many years. I speak German, I spent a lot of time there. They have a very kind of holistic attitude towards health, generally speaking as well. And it's sort of private insurer based to boot. And the other thing that's very helpful in Germany is that the primary care are much more geared around the primary care, so GPs are the equivalent GPs, are much even further along the pathway to being their own entrepreneurs, as opposed to in the UK. Obviously, GP surgeries are businesses here, but a lot of their funding is coming directly from the local CCG, which is the kind of local NHS body that gets budget from the national NHS body and then sort of works out how to divvy it up in that particular region. But what I would say is that the pace or the speed of innovation and the volume of innovative companies coming out of the UK is really, within health tech, is kind of rivaling the US, I would think, at the moment, in terms of that sort of volume and that interest. I think the difference that I've noticed is, and this is where you guys come in, so it's a nice segue, because you mentioned, bringing that kind of West Coast attitude, and I guess that West Coast reference is really more of it's sort of like a code word to the Silicon Valley type of reference, is really that funding pathway. So where a health tech company could be the same company in the UK or Europe and the same company in the US, the ability for that company to raise money is easier, and the ability for that company to raise at a higher valuation and to raise more money is probably higher. But yes, you guys are trying to fill that gap. But I think that now, I was saying to someone today, the sort of, in the UK, I think we're living in a period now, as you say, partly created by this pandemic, of just unbelievable innovation right now. A health tech revolution, to coin a phrase. And so, yeah, so tell us about how Start Codon is kind of helping with that.
Yeah, so I think, and we can talk about Cambridge in a minute, because you mentioned Peter mentioned
Please,
that
yeah.
in the previous show. But I think, so if we start with what we're doing, and then why we're based in Cambridge, I think might be useful. But so we are a UK venture fund. We're structured like most of the UK venture funds. We invest a minimum of 250,000. We can invest more in limited circumstances, but primarily we have our investors are strategic investors, and we would look to fill on any instance where we don't follow on our money through our LP base and through partners who we work with, and the traction there has started to really kind of pull together more with the people we work with, but as kind of syndication and follow on partners. But so we invest cash, cold hard cash, minimum of 250K. We'll do that very early doors. So we won't fund an idea. We need data, but we will fund it and spin companies out direct from institutions. There's some actually majority of
and the reason why that's important is that, as you said earlier, just to explain to everyone listening, a huge amount of the really, really high tech innovation is happening in university institutions. Right? But in order to get the maximum of that innovation, it needs to be spun out, i.e. removed from the institution and then created into a company that can then fully maximize that value and bring that technology to the world. That's kind of what you mean, right?
That's a fair summary, yeah. And I think that it's not, they're far better in the US at doing that through institutions like MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and so on.
Stanford, yeah.
They're very, very good at getting that out. They've got a very well trodden pathway to creating companies. We are getting better. We aren't quite, we're not as slick as the US. And sometimes actually some of the people who create the really great disruptive market changing technologies don't even think about spinning out a company. It's only when we talk to them that they think, oh, actually that's something that they actually want to do, because either they've been struggling to license out the technology and struggling to develop in another way, but actually spinning out the company offers them a new way to do that. So
yeah.
We utilize our expertise. There's 5 of us in the team. So there's me. There's with my background. So I've been involved in lots of licensing transactions and spin out deals before. So I can utilize that as part and parcel of negotiating the spin out. We've got Jason, my co-founder, who's also the CEO of Start Codon, who's business development backgrounds,
ex-CEO of
So he's had several fundraising rounds for them and helped the company to pivot a few years ago into what it's currently doing. We have a patent attorney called Sakura Holloway. We have another colleague who's joining us soon from a very well-known charity, and we've got a colleague called Sylvia Bardone who manages our partnerships. And
Sylvia's great.
Yeah, I think you've dealt with her.
Yeah, she's the one that helped me get involved with the program with the code.
Yeah, which is and your help's been really invaluable, I think, to the companies that have been speaking to you. And so we utilize all that expertise to help spin the companies out, and then we utilize our expertise of being involved in early stage companies across the board to help with things like patent strategies. We're in, as we said before, a 6-month acceleration program where we, as part of, we call it an acceleration program. It's a bit weird because if we're spinning people out, it is an acceleration program, but it isn't in the sense of we're kind of teaching them how to walk and set everything from scratch. So normally people associate acceleration with the existing company, putting money in and accelerating it so it goes off and can raise a larger round. That is still what we're doing. We are spinning companies out and we are growing them at pace in a very short period of time, but it's perhaps not acceleration in the sense that people might be used to it. But we utilize the expertise to set the companies up, get their IT sorted, get the data protection system sorted, get their website up and running, give them access to people like you as mentors, give access to wider partner and investor networks. All sorts of things which they wouldn't, and we dedicate hours of our day. We dedicate specific times, specific days to the companies, and we really get into the weeds. Very time intensive, but we think that it's time well spent because we do feel we can achieve in the 6 months that they are with us intensively, and we do keep in contact with them for throughout the investment period. But we have a kind of a lighter touch kind of second 6 month period. But we do really feel that in that period of time we can do the amount of early stage work, patent strategy, business plan writing and development that actually the companies would take several years to do. Right. So we still do feel we can accelerate it, but it's perhaps in a different way than if we're spinning people out, different way than people might normally think of an acceleration program working.
Okay. Does the program focus on any particular types of technology or particular areas within health tech?
So we will generally invest in anyone in kind of healthcare life sciences space, but in terms of we like platform technologies because they have an application. So platform technology is a technology which you can use in a variety of ways. So you can use it to license to other people to develop the technology in certain areas, or the company could develop it itself. It's a base technology which can be applied in a multitude of.
So it's almost like if you created a way to test for certain things, you would be able to license out that methodology to other people to test for different things, for example.
Correct. Or you could apply it to different, you can have a technology which, focuses on, gene editing, and you can apply it in different sectors, subsectors for different types of people, for animals, and maybe, there are some technologies you can use in healthcare. You can also use in agriculture, for example. So it's technologies with multiple applications. But then, whilst we have a preference for that, we primarily look at digital health, health tech generally, therapeutics, and within health tech, you cover things like med devices.
Is there anything that you guys kind of steer away from, or deliberately, or is it you're open to anything in theory?
I think in theory we're open to anything. So we've got a pretty wide experience on the team. We've got a wider experience with the members of our board. So we've got the likes of Jonathan Milner on there. We've got representatives from Cambridge Innovation Capital.
Yeah, you guys have an unbelievable backing.
Yeah, representatives from different organisations. We have an LP base who's experts we can tap into as well. So we have perhaps a specialism for more of the kind of med devices, therapeutics plays, but we're certainly not alien to other players which are more digital based. We've got lots of expertise around the table. We've been involved in a lot of deals, and so the intention is really to just grab to invest in and help to mentor and nurture the companies that are really exciting and producing really disruptive technology across the kind of spectrum.
So if you're a company like right now, or maybe you're in an institution in a university, you have a cool technology, or why would they join the program versus just continuing on to do whatever they're going to do?
I think so. Several reasons, really. I think if you are in a university institution or another type of institution, the attitudes on kind of using that technology can vary. So they can be very focused on research, and actually they can have a product which is perfectly capable of solving solutions now, but sometimes research happens ad nauseum, and actually you could do more with it. You could apply it better to benefit.
Like research for the sake of research. Right?
Research, sometimes. Sometimes people don't realize that they can spin out their technology. There are other reasons why. So
do you see people that like they might not realize what they've got?
We've got some companies that we've invested in who unfortunately I can't talk about today for right.
You've got like the secret squirrel crew.
Yeah, exactly. I will talk about some, but there are people there who didn't realize the applicability of their tech until we were talked to, and then when you talk to them about what the technology can do, it broadens their horizons. So the instances of actually just people wanting to get their technology out to the masses, and sometimes the easier way to do that is not to license technology out to someone else, but it's to take control and ownership of that yourself,
right? And
then to drive that forward into a company which has a platform, has a product which can then benefit patients. And there's a personal element to it as well, right? I mean, it can be it can be financially and emotionally rewarding, and you can own that tech through spinning out your company. So if you spin out a company, as opposed to say just licensing out the technology, you might get, if you're an inventor of a technology, you might get a licensing revenue stream, which is great. But you might not own the company. You might not benefit from the financial benefits you get from owning shares in a company that develops a world-leading tech. And so there are economic benefits as well as kind of social and personal benefits from doing that, which you just might not get if it was to stay within the institution or was to be licensed out by the institution to someone else.
Okay. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so what kind of companies are on it? Well, I mean, I've met some of them, but can you talk us and the listeners through a little bit about some of the awesome technology or companies that are in there that you can talk about without trying to open up the stealth box?
Yeah. So I'll talk about some that are in the public domain, if that's all right.
Please.
We'll have some really, really interesting announcements for some of our newer companies soon, which we're also very, very excited about. But for the moment, I'm just going to stay away from those, and we'll talk about the companies I think that you will have particularly worked with, Steve. And so one company is a company called Enhanced Genomics. It's got
Enhanced Genomics.
Yeah, Enhanced Genomics. It's enhanced. It's 3 Ds rather than ED at the end.
Okay.
I'll tell you why that is in a moment. So
okay, great.
It's called Enhanced Genomics. It's got technology that enables it to reveal novel disease-causing genes and pathways in cell types and patient biopsies. So fundamentally, this technology allows the company to produce pretty much the highest resolution data mapping of 3D chromosomal interactions between DNA reg elements and the promoters of the genes that they control. So the relevance of that is that the chromosomal interactions are really crucial for understanding function of disease-associated genetic variants. So what that means in practice is that the existing technologies out there don't make it easy to deduce chromosomal interactions. It's quite hard to get the data that you need. So the company's technology enables it to unlock discovery potential of huge amounts of kind of population genetic data, and the company's made developments to the technology which enables it to open up opportunities to reveal disease-causing genes and pathways in cell types and biopsies. So what that means in practice is that the company has technology that can enable it to identify. They'll be used in drug discovery and other treatments. It's got to work a world-leading team of geneticists, pretty much unparalleled in the space. But it can basically, as I said, identify chromosomal interactions, which other people and other technologies.
Is that the ability to identify those? Is that something that had not been done before in this way? So this is a genuine world first.
Yeah, it can be done, but the existing technology is one-dimensional. The technology the company uses is three-dimensional.
Hence the 3Ds.
3D, and so what it enables the company to do is to really identify those chromosomal interactions, which then gives the company insights in how diseases are formed, how they function, which
and therefore how you treat
the
them.
current technology just can't do. So that if you can understand how diseases and these interactions work, then you can then identify ways to treat those diseases.
Okay.
And so it enables a huge potential for things like drug discovery, which is just not available at the moment.
Right, because it means that they can make drugs that are more targeted, more suited to fixing genetic diseases.
Because or they can identify treatments that would be applicable to those diseases, for example, which people may not have already be aware.
Because they can map the problems at the chromosome level.
Yeah, correct.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
We've got another company called Sporea, which is redefining antibody drug conjugates. So antibody drug conjugates, they effectively combine cell killing activities of cytotoxic drug payloads with targeting ability of an antibody. So they've got the potential to redefine things such as chemotherapy and cancer care. And the ADCs are not new. So you probably think, why invest in an ADC company? Well, I think the issue so far is that only a few ADCs have reached market, and that's for a variety of reasons, due to factors such as ADCs exhibiting high systemic toxicity, the lack of flexibility in perhaps the format of the ADCs and the choice of targets and payloads, ultimately creating big tox issues when you put the payloads on the ADC and then you try and deliver it into the system. So Sporea's got a platform technology which can be incorporated into ADCs to ensure that the right amount of payload is delivered to the right cells. So it enables so
is it almost it allows the cellular delivery of these of the drug effectively?
Correct. And the payloads, and as a result of the technology, the data suggests that it's quite good data suggests that it can create more safer and more efficacious treatments than what are currently.
Is this the company that was looking at pancreatic cancer? Or is that a different one? Because I remember speaking to one of yours that sounds like they were doing something like that, but for pancreatic cancer with chemotherapy drugs.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Because I think it had the potential to make a massive difference to outcomes for that particular cancer.
And it just enables the delivery of payloads to the system into the right places, so that the toxic effects are reduced. And so,
sorry, go on.
No, go on.
No, I was going to say, both those companies, what they're doing sounds phenomenal. There's a lot of words in there that I wasn't necessarily wholly familiar with, but I kind of got the gist of it. But those, both of those, did they come out of universities, or were they companies before they got to you guys?
So one out of an institution, one out of the university, and then of the other two companies, I can mention Drishti and Sumerian. Another one again out of university, another one out of a company, actually, that one, but originally came out of a university as well. So again, all to do with the spinning out a huge amount of tech, as you said at the start of the show, in those institutions, and some really potentially really technologies.
Yeah, the what you're talking about there, and I know this is the kind of the same for most, if not all, of your companies, is that the problems they solve are effectively global. They exist in all markets in some way, shape, or form, and it's millions, if not billions, of people that they will help. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show, was because these companies will not be on the tip of people's tongues, in the general population, but what they're doing will be the treatments that we will be having in 10 or 15 or 20 years time, hopefully.
Yeah, I think so. And just looking at the other companies, I'll just give them a shout out.
Please do it.
Got another company called Drishti Discoveries, which has a technology that can treat previously untreatable genetic disorders, and it has a focus on the kind of rare and orphan disease space. So fundamentally, it's a gene editing company, and it can, at a very high level, massively oversimplifying it, but they can replace, so they can silence, so effectively stop working and replace faulty genes, so genes that create certain genetic conditions, with kind of wild healthy genes. And
so they can actually switch the gene off.
They can switch the gene off and then replace it with a healthy one to get rid of their conditions. So Drishti is very, very well developed technology.
Is it CRISPR, or is it kind of a different version of CRISPR?
No, so it's HRNA based modulation technology. So it has its own technology. It's actually the technology itself that's been licensed. It's almost like the gold standard for what it does. And the company's got a license to it for a variety of reasons, but has a focus on the rare and orphan disease space, which is an area obviously I spent several years in. And has huge benefits. If you develop a treatment that can tackle rare and orphan diseases, apart from offering a solution to diseases that have previously been untreatable or can't, or people haven't bothered either because of financial or other reasons to develop treatments for.
Yeah, because the numbers, so orphan diseases are basically diseases that afflict a relatively small number of people. So sometimes they fall through the gap in terms of having large amounts of financial investment put into them to find treatments, because drug companies or therapeutic companies don't feel like they can make it pay back. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's correct, and it effectively depends on which which standard you look at, but depending on which type of rare disease, you're looking at anything from 1 in 20,000 to 1 in 200,000+ people. So in terms of the incentive for companies to develop technologies to treat these markets, the market may only be worth, say, 100 to 300 million a year, which is a lot smaller than you find for people who in say cancer, where it's billions and billions a year. So the incentive people to develop treatments to help solve rare diseases and so on is limited. So there are various incentives you can get from the EMA, from the FDA, to develop treatments for rare diseases, things like market exclusivity help and fast tracking of treatments. And the company's found a way to effectively use gene editing to solve to go ahead and solve certain rare diseases.
And how far off is that in market, or how far off market is that?
So still generating data, but the technology, we're pretty confident about the company's ability to develop technology.
That's awesome. What was that company called?
Called Drishti Discoveries. And Drishti Discoveries.
Drishti, okay, cool.
And the final company is a company called Semisites, which is a company that's effectively redefining cellular assays. So we all know cell-based assays are crucial in life sciences, and they enable people to study biological processes, evaluate drug compounds, and so on and so forth. So effectively, Semisites has developed a product called Semisites. Semisites are basically microscale cell carriers, so that they're super small, effectively wafers, like magnetic wafers that you can attach cells to, and you can do all sorts of fantastic things with the technology. So you can pull cells together, you can analyze cells in certain different ways, and you can therefore use that in things such as drug discovery, drug screening campaigns, and so on. And because
so you can build your own sort of cellular matrix using
and not just that as well, but currently cell-based assays, they're quite intensive. Data output and reproducibility can be quite difficult. The company reckons that it can increase output by up to 50-fold and decrease costs in some instances by over 100-fold.
So what is a cellular assay? Just in case anyone listening doesn't know, what is that and why is it so critical?
Yeah, so cell assays, in terms of how I tend to describe them, effectively a bit like an algorithm. So you have an assay tells you how to, say, analyze, it's a process basically. So it enables you to put something into it, to run the process in the assay and to get a result.
So input, output.
to generate output. Yes. You know, because of various factors that affect how assays are run, you can suffer from quite poor output. You can suffer from things being quite time, cost, labor intensive. And you know, the guys at Semisites have developed a really really new and exciting technology that enables them to not only make that quicker, more effective, but also to massively improve the output of those assays and to effectively redefine, you know, how things are statistic biological processes.
So again, that's a platform technology, right?
Again, yeah, it is.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Wow. And you get how often are you getting new companies in? Is it every year or every 6 months?
So we run the program every 6 months. We've got a continuous recruitment cycle. So we
Okay.
accept applications all year round. We bucket investments into 6-month periods because we run the program broadly every 6 months. So we start it. We run a boot camp, which is an intensive kind of week-long boot camp. We get loads of people in like yourself, specialists in different areas to talk about things from legal, accountancy, tax, insurance, you know, matters, you know, which they really need to be aware of when starting.
But likely things that they've not necessarily had to come across or deal with before.
Exactly. And then, you know, we run a kind of a follow-on sessions with partners in other areas, you know, from say banking and so on, to enable them to understand, to get a big overview, not just of the technological side of things, but also of the other commercial players and partners and areas that are going to be relevant when they set up a new business. So we run that kicks off every 6 months, and then we run a cycle of 6-month investments. So broadly invest in 5 companies every 6 months, 10 a year. Run a boot camp at the start of each 6 months, and we'll look to invest in broadly between 36 and 50 companies over the next. We will shortly have touchwood 9.
That's awesome.
And hopefully at least another 40 or so to
I mean,
go.
and you think about like each one of those companies, any one of those companies could be delivering a game-changing health tech technology, or every single one of them. I mean, it's kind of actually, it's amazing what you guys are doing.
So I'd be interested now, because obviously you and I got speaking originally about Start Codon. I'm interested to know what made, because you've got an experienced management team, but interested to know what made you go down the kind of route of getting financing yourself rather than going through an accelerator, for example.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So when we first started talking to you guys, we had already raised, I think, our second round. We'd just raised our initial, we'd raised our sort of, I guess, our angel round. And we were kind of, we'd already sort of gone through a really, really intensive due diligence process for that. You know, we'd laid out a full business plan. We had, you know, milestones and markers and everything kind of laid down. And obviously I mean, look, I'm a huge fan of the program, but it just felt like we were slightly too organized. This is probably, I don't mean it in a bad way, but we sort of had a plan, if that makes sense. Now, it might turn out that we should have been with you guys from the start, you know, and that's on me or on us. But we sort of like, we just couldn't get, we just couldn't kind of figure out how to sort of like put what we already told people and committed to with the investors, to then say, well, no, actually, we've now decided to just kind of completely switch and then sort of go over here. But the program, and there were certain elements where, like you say, because of the experience that we already had in the management team, and, you know, Peter Cowley's on the board, and, you know, we've got some very, very experienced backers and advisors. There was a lot that we, in a weird way, that we didn't necessarily need. You know, we were sorted on the IP. We already had a lot of we had our patents filed. We had, you know, good progress on the commercial side of things. You know, I think the big thing that we would have really, really benefited from was actually the support on the technology.
Yeah,
that's definitely something in hindsight where we could have really, really benefited from tapping into the program's network within Cambridge to help us speed up our technology development. You know, in the end, it's all been fine, but certainly for a 6-month period of time at the beginning, that would have been super helpful, because it took us. I think the thing that we did notice was that you know, starting a wet lab or a certified lab from scratch, which is what we did, and hiring scientists, which is what we did, you know, it's not suddenly like, you know, on the plan it says day 1 open lab, day 2, you know, development starts. Whereas, you know, actually in reality, there's sort of finding the right people, bedding in the right people, putting that all in place alongside all the regulatory stuff that you have to do. There's just some lead time on that. So I think that support from the program would have been amazing.
No, I mean, to me that makes sense. I mean, again, you've got a team which had been through, been through the whole process of, yourself setting things up, exiting, everything else. That's already happened. I think, it's good to know that you would have benefited from aspects of it, but equally, entirely understand why you might have taken that loan.
Well, I tell you what, I'll tell you what, the next health tech company I set up will definitely come on it. Don't worry. I promise you that. So we're both in Cambridge. So why Cambridge? Why Cambridge? What's good about Cambridge?
Let's not be around the bush. It's the healthcare epicenter of Europe.
Yeah, I agree.
It just is. And if you look at the stats, it's coming up to, it's very close in terms of its numbers, in terms of the amount of innovation that's happening there, in terms of just the sheer multitude of companies, to being close to MIT and to Stanford. But it's in the top 3 in the world as a place to be if you're in the healthcare life sciences sector. It's surrounded by people who understand the area and the sector, because the ecosystem
it's got an amazing set of educated investors, I would think. Or I would say, and that's critical.
Yeah, and it has the facilities which you won't get in other places, and the network which you just won't get in other places for healthcare. Now, there's obviously a huge tech scene in places like London. There's a huge tech scene, and I still think London is the leading tech hub in Europe, notwithstanding what happened a few days ago. But there are obviously big tech hubs in other places, but I genuinely don't think there is anywhere else in Europe to be other than Cambridge in the UK in terms of healthcare and life sciences. I think it's a barometer for Europe. It's the epicenter of innovation and so on for Europe. We've got a fantastic science sector in the UK, huge, across the UK, but actually a huge part of that is based in Cambridge. And I just think the resources it offers to people is currently unparalleled in the region.
Yeah, and also I would agree. And I think that obviously we actually, when we set the company up, we were looking at London or Cambridge, so those two. And my co-founder Kieran, she's got a background in Cambridge. She went to Cambridge, and obviously we've got a number of investors from the Cambridge cluster. So we were split between the two, and then we just realised that it's almost like it's a crucible of development in Cambridge. Its focus is so strong on life sciences and health tech that actually just by being in that ecosystem, you get a huge amount of benefit. Whereas I completely agree with you. If you take tech broadly, then London, without question, is the place to be. But being outside of London, in Cambridge, particularly for health tech, is a huge bonus. And if you need to get to London, it's only 40 minutes on the train. So we're on the Vital Signs Solutions is on the NHS Digital London Accelerator, but because it's almost one and the same thing, geographically speaking. From a sort of a company perspective, we can be there as often as we want to, and all of any tech solution can work in London or work outside of London. It's sort of, it's just a line on a map. So yeah, no, we're a big fan as well, and I would recommend that any company that's within the health tech or life sciences space should look at Cambridge.
It's changed last 10 years as well in terms of facilities, accessibility, everything. It's gone through a huge transformation, and I mean it was always the epicenter, I think, of innovation for healthcare. But in terms of the facilities available to it, it's just gone through a tremendous change in the last 10, 15 years, and I really do believe it's the place to be, notwithstanding everything that's happened, over the past few years. It's still the leader in my opinion.
Do you think that Start Codon could have happened in another place, or there's something special about Cambridge?
I think there's something special about Cambridge. I think, could it happen? I think the industry was. I think there's a need for it. So could it have happened outside of Cambridge? Yes. Would we have wanted it to have happened outside of Cambridge? Because bear in mind, we look at companies from everywhere across the world. We just operate our accelerator and our fund from Cambridge, and we have lab space and office space there as well, which we give to companies, and we encourage them to relocate to the area and to benefit from all the resources in the area. There's no reason to, but could we have done it? I think yes. Would we have wanted to do it outside the area? No, I don't think so. Can't see anywhere else.
Yeah, no, I mean we're the same.
Oxford is obviously up there, but that's a separate radio show.
Yeah, well, that's I have that argument with my co-founder regularly, but yeah,
tremendous with the vaccine, incidentally, and great that that was, and Oxford obviously another hub for innovation as well. Joking aside.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left, so let's touch on something, kind of a topic of the day that I know is close to your heart, close to my heart, is what changes do you think have happened or will happen as a result of the pandemic to healthcare systems? I know that we talked a bit about a few things beforehand, but like what bridges have we crossed that we're not going back across?
Yeah, so I think there's been, and I get your thoughts on this. I think there's been a huge change in attitude, forced attitude because of the pandemic. So I think for health, for what does that mean for kind of health tech? I think there's opportunities for health tech in a whole range of different areas, from looking at ways that things like testing could be improved and made more efficient, POC testing,
Point
tools
of care.
to health tech. Yeah, yeah, exactly, or to streamline things. We've talked about early diagnosis and preventative tech. I think there's a huge opportunity there, which needs to be explored. But I think also, people generally people's day-to-day lives, going to the doctors, going to hospital. I think there's been a lot of data suggests that people are really reluctant, particularly vulnerable people, to go into hospitals, to healthcare settings generally.
Yeah.
So there's been a forced change on the system about how people are diagnosed, as we mentioned earlier, whether that, and then technologies to kind of implement that. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for health tech in enabling that to happen, because I can't see us going back to the way that we were entirely. I mean, there'll always be face-to-face stuff, but I think there's a huge opportunity for digital health solutions, training solutions, robotics, AI. I think the world is literally health tech's oyster in that sense, because I think we've had a full paradigm shift of where we were versus where we are now.
Yeah.
And I can't see us going back to not using things like video consultations or telephone consultations.
Well, and we need solutions, like you say, for the ability to monitor chronic conditions outside of GP surgeries or outside of clinical settings, which is, we're playing our small part in that around cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. But I completely agree, and I hope we don't go back to that, because ultimately being able to treat things outside of a clinical setting, I think, has benefits to the patient, as well as to the system. So I hope that we can make that stuff stick. So, yeah.
I think there's also been a change in how people manage their health. So I'm not just talking about health in the kind of sense that that Start Codon looks at health and healthcare, but also in terms of treatments for how people manage mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
How they will live their lives, because being cooped up effectively in a house, working from home, or even being forced to go into an office where you feel uncomfortable, has impacts on people's mental health. And I think that the more that we can do to help people get control of their lives, as you said at the start, with what you guys are doing, the more you can enable people and get them to take control of their own health and their own lives, I think the better that's going to be for all and society.
I agree. Well, look, we've run out of time. Daniel, thank you so much for your time. Start Codon is creating the companies of the future. So hopefully, we can get you back on where you can talk about your next cohort. But good luck with everything. And thanks a lot for joining the show.
Thank you very much for your time, and to all your listeners. Thanks, Steve.